Hi everybody, it is Trisha LaCroix once again with Sacred Uprising Institute and Retreat, and we just had to start this video over, which is perfectly fine, and we found out what the glitch was, and Skyler will be jumping on in just a moment. And Skyler, I'll introduce her in just a few moments once she gets on, but I wanted to once again to talk a little bit about some announcements. So just to remind everybody, please go to our YouTube channel, which is Sacred Uprising. Look for the pink peony and subscribe, and you will be notified on YouTube every time that a new video, live video, is uploaded, and they get uploaded within 24 hours of when we do it live. In addition to that, we also have our Sacred Uprising retreat that's coming up September 18th, 19th, and 20th. It's in the hills outside of Santa Cruz, California. It's actually Watsonville, and it's going to be at Mount Madonna. You can go check out Mount Madonna at mountmadonna.org, and you can go to our website, which is sacreduprising.com. There we go. Yay! Got you. Jumping on now here in just a second. So you can go to Mount Madonna and get some additional information on about the facility there. Also, you can go to sacreduprising.com. And it works. See, what I didn't, I guess I failed to tell her is that you can't do the live with somebody else from Good Morning Bliss from your computer. You have to do it from your phone. So I was just telling everybody about our Sacred Uprising retreat that is coming up. Yeah. So if you go to sacreduprising.com, you can purchase tickets there. We have many different levels. I wanted to make this accessible to anybody that wants to transform their life. And the focus of this conference is about infinite love within, letting it rise within. We have people that are going to be teaching about Kabbalah, that will be teaching. Bliss is on here right now. She'll be teaching about sovereignty, Christ consciousness, the divine feminine, the divine masculine. We have people coming in that are going to be teaching about light language and 0-point energy and like even the Star of Solomon, what that does within you. In fact, I'm wearing one today. It was gifted to me by the person who's going to be teaching it. So there are so many amazing things that are going to happen, from the vendors that will be selling their elixirs for the divine union, divine masculine and feminine, and many other elixirs, to people that somebody will be there writing light language on scrolls for anybody who wants to purchase them. And it's really about the blueprint of your life that you agreed to before you were born. It is going to be a retreat that will transcend and change and just radically beautify and attract abundance into everybody's life. And I'm not talking about abundance with monetary gain, which that's a byproduct, but abundance when it comes to peace and love and joy and a life fulfilled. But that being said, Skyler, I see that Shanti Zimmerman is watching. She's an amazing life coach. And Shanti had shared something that you had posted on your Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I don't remember. Lori Green is watching. She's one of our teachers who will be teaching Kabbalah. It had moved me so much. It moved me to the point of tears, Skyler. And I shared it with some of my friends that had gone through, that were going from being, molested and raped and all these horrific things that have happened to them. And they were on their path of healing, and not just healing, but not just a survivor, but a thriver, of somebody that is an inspiration. And I shared what you had written with them, and I've watched your journey. I have been so moved by what you write, what you post, the freedom that you have within those shackles just don't seem to exist anymore to what has happened to you. And I am so proud and so grateful that I was led. I never asked somebody to come on here that I'm not moved to by my guides, that they prompted me on Instagram, no less, to go ahead and just, offer you this opportunity for us to have a conversation. Yeah. And it just happened to align. It was divine timing to the changes that were going on in your life. So with, I don't want to, delay this any longer. So Skyler, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. It's something that I love. I was so excited that you were open to doing it more organic, like a conversation, just because everything I do right and everything I do in my work and advocacy that is a privilege is meant to be like sitting across the table from someone and listening, because it's so much bigger than one story. It's everyone's story. And I think it's something that I talk about all the time. Being a human is traumatic. And no matter what your history is, being able to be believed and heard and seen and acknowledged is rare. And it's like a form of privilege these days to have that given authentically, because if we don't know how, if we've never had the opportunity or space to give that to ourselves, how do we extend that authentically to another person? And so to be able to engage in that conversation in a new way, in a different way, is so vitally important to the work that I do. And so just to sit down with you, like it is a conversation and I'm holding my phone up,
right.
is
right. I know.
is so it's supposed to be that way. I think I try and do things with authenticity, and I definitely started with the rigidity and the uncomfortableness and, you know, holding my skin in and like, no, I don't want to do it. But
Right.
it's my work is aligned with my healing. And so everything is about that story and that underlying foundation. And so it's, again, just my gift to be able to sit across from you, even over the internet, and hold this conversation.
I know, right? You know, yesterday we spoke, and it was funny. I was having a conversation with Bliss this morning, and she actually said it regarding something else. So I wanted to tap into it right quick before, because I would like to know, to let our viewers know a little bit about your story, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. But when we were talking yesterday, I was listening to, and Christopher, who's actually creating our website, he's watching, and he does the same thing. That what I notice is that the way that you speak, and I can just imagine you sitting across from these survivors, and the way that you speak, because the things that have happened to us, we can allow it to weave an unhealthy pattern. The universe weave this unhappy, I shouldn't say it's not the universe weaving it. We weave an unhealthy pattern of our life, of how we view circumstances and things that have happened to us. But as I was listening to you yesterday when we spoke, I was like, oh my gosh, she gives every single person that she speaks to this opportunity of reweaving it, of taking it and making it beautiful. Beauty from ashes. It's our choice on how we want to move forward from it. And that's why I don't see the chains around you, so, you know, that would tie you back to what has happened to you. I see somebody that has risen from, that has had this beautiful risen from it, and this glow about you, saying, no, I've ascended from it. Let me show you the way.
Yeah. And it's that toggle between that freedom and that overwhelming gift of safety that allows me in particular to continue to feel that pain, and not in a way that I'm shackled to it, but in a way that honors, you know, I always talk about my little girl. It's, you know, I have a collection of 18 of them, and I get to hold them every day in different ways. And it's that space of going, how can I respond to what's going on in my body today? Not from a space of blame or shame or understanding that like I am a victim, but instead like kneel down next to a child and look at them in the eye and say, I believe you. I hear you. I see you. I don't understand how you endured what you did, but I'm not questioning where you stand right now and how hard it is. And it's different each day. It's a gift to, you know, establish a life that I never thought that I would have. And at that same time, hold compassion to the past life that I lived and understand that that's still a part of me, but it's not chained to me. And how do I separate it? And so we talked about a little yesterday about saying like, we're not healing from the fixed point of the abuse, because whether it's, you know, comprehensive and complex and long like mine was, or a singular event or something that you don't even know how to name yet, it is a fixed point. We can't change it. And when we're sitting in that space of trying to change it or shift away from it, we're more chained to it. And with privilege and with resource and with safety and understanding, we get to step away from that fixed point and instead turn back inward into ourselves and go, how did that event, how did that fixed point sit within our body? What is it doing with us today? Like, how is it affecting the way that we walk in the world and engage in relationship and understand who we are when we look in the mirror, or touch our skin, or just engage in conversation with ourselves. And it's so powerful to be able to like pause. And that's what safety does. It goes, you can pause. You don't have to make a life or death decision. And trauma ingrains that into you. It says you have to make decisions out of life or death all the time. And it's taken so long for me to shift that slowly. And it's still a pendulum, but I find more balance in it every day. So yeah, definitely.
Right. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about what your story is?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was raised in California, to a pretty privileged upbringing. And at 18 months, I started to receive molestation and inappropriate touching from my father. And it started around kindergarten to become more sexual. And that engaged in going from, I used to deem it as like playful, and it's taken me a long time and a lot of grace and a lot of compassion to understand that none of it was playful and none of it was okay. But as a child's mind, when you're dealing with repressed memory, it's coming back in the form of that child or that space that you were in when you underwent that memory. And so it takes that adult perspective to hold that with clarity. And holding it with clarity now, I understand that none of it was playful. And then it started to engage in more serious sexual incest onward from that point on. And by the time I was 13, it started to become sex trafficking, where I was trafficked to authority, neighbors. My father was in the Navy, and so I have a huge fear of authority. I have a huge fear of police, and it's definitely difficult to navigate today. My mother was also involved in the trauma itself. She was the one who groomed me and the one who physically abused me and the one who pushed drugs onto me and manipulated me on a daily basis, as well as engaged in molestation. And so from 18 months to 18 years, I navigated incest, sex trafficking, drugs, and a really complex family trauma history that was not just inclusive to me, my mom, and my dad, but external to my mother's family as well.
Wow. So when you were 18, how did you walk away from all of that?
Yeah, so I ended up getting really sick at 14. My body ended up speaking for me on behalf of this voice that I didn't have, and I got really, really sick. And so I ended up dropping out of high school, and it was very intelligent in the way that that my abuse was played out because of the privilege. And so I was very involved in extracurricular activity. I was a straight A student. From the outside looking in, no one would have guessed, besides the fact that throughout my, I would say elementary school years into like high school, my teachers would notice a lot. And so my mother actually became a teacher and would follow me to every school that I went to make sure that I wasn't speaking to anybody, because social workers started to kind of recognize and pinpoint, like, she's having an inverse emotional reaction to all of these things that is more amplified than a child going through this level of development should feel. So around 14, I got sick with an autoimmune disease that I still deal with today. And it's something that I talk about very prevalently in abuse, is just as a child, what is your main source of control? Your body. And so when you have childhood abuse, it's a natural response for the body to develop a type of bodily manifestation of the trauma in order to speak about it and to voice that, because you don't have the language yet. You don't have, whether the language isn't in a developmental sense or you are unsafe to speak about it, your body is going to become this powerful conduit of, I'm not safe, I'm not okay, I don't know why, but I know that something's not right. And so I speak about that a lot too. I kind of toggle back and forth, but I speak about that a lot too in my work, just because the body is our powerful resource. And when there's something going on in the body, how can we, with space and with pause and with stillness, sit down and go, can you tell me what's wrong? And start having that conversation and development with your body. So at 18, I was in the hospital from 14 for about 2 months. And then I was bedridden, most of 15 years old, still engaging in sexual abuse from my father. And that was when a lot of the drug play came into focus, a lot of opiates and medication that just completely destroyed and wrecked my body. And that also kept me a little bit more quiet because as you develop, despite it being such a normalized thing in my home, I definitely did start to question a little bit more. And I was more vocal.
Right.
I had different language to use about I don't feel safe or saying things that could possibly lead to being caught. And so
Right.
drugs were heavily used then. It wasn't until I was 16, 17 that I started to be able to like go outside again. But I was so heavily into drugs, and the trafficking became worse, and the physical and sex abuse became worse. And so I was a shell at that point. I kind of call that my darkest time. But within those
Right.
years, I met people that didn't grow up with me, because everyone who grew up with me they weren't safe enough to share with. But I met a group of people who actually went to my middle school. They connected with me randomly on Facebook. I assumed at the beginning that it was for prostitution and my sex trafficking, because a lot of people did engage with me in that level. So I had a very high lack of distrust, and they ended up being a
Right.
family that invited me out, and it was very subtle. I came back from a trip to Ireland actually when I was 18, and I sat in their like big huge closet, and they kind of just subtly offered me a key to their home, and they had no idea the level of abuse that I was going through. But because they were victims themselves, they had an understanding that it's not okay. They were a mama, and they came to hug me the first time we met, and I stepped back and I said, "You can't touch me, it hurts." And as a mother from a
Oh, wow.
child, she was like, okay, but understood that there was something else going on. And
Right.
so offered me this key. I was very, very resistant. I was like, no, 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 it's okay. Like, I don't like, thank you so much, but I don't need it. And, but then within the course of about 2 months after that, the abuse started getting a lot worse. And I had the privilege to kind of make that decision myself I'm going to try and escape. And so I did slowly start packing up my belongings. I had the wherewithal to like get my social security cards and things like this when my family wasn't home. And I chose a date and I did leave. But because of the intensity of the abuse, because this family taking me in had the best of intentions, but no actual resource in order to hold a story like mine, within a month I was
Right.
back in with my family. And because they love me so deeply, they said, Skyler, we don't want you back to your family. We understand that this is a lot bigger than we had anticipated. We can either help you go into rehab and get away like secretively, or you can go on the street, but we won't let you back with your family. But please, like, know that like there's another option. And so I ended up going to rehab in Arizona for 2.5 months. And with that was like kind of my official exit from my family.
Wow. Wow. So, how did because, when I went through, when I don't have the story at all that what you have, but when I left my family, I had to run away. When I left my family, it was a transition. It was a journey to get back to find myself,
Yeah.
because I had to destroy the foundation that I was born into.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand feeling like a shell. I literally felt like I had no soul.
Yeah.
I was walking around with no soul. And it was the darkest time of my life for me. But so talk to us about your journey for healing. You came from, you built this beauty that you are today out of the rubble. Talk to me about how that transpired.
Yeah. I walking into rehab, I was this kind of, again, straight A, perfect, very made up shell of this idealized version of a child, and someone who was also pleasured. Like I was born to be of pleasure, and I was born to fill need for other people. And so I had to have the answers. I had to look a certain way. I had to
Yeah.
act a certain way. And So I engaged in healing in that same capacity in the first, I would say, like month of being in rehab. And so I was the person who was the quiet one, the polite person, I have all the answers. I look dressed up, even though we have to get up at 5:30 and do all of these things. And everybody was depressed and upset. And like, I hadn't even cried. I was just armor. And it was this really powerful moment where I was invited to share my story. And I've always had a very eloquent way of speaking and writing. It's been my sanctuary since a child. And so I wrote my narrative of my story, and it was this poetic and beautiful thing. And I shared it to everybody at rehab, and I was so proud of it. And then I sit down to share it in our group therapy session, and I have a panic attack. And I had never actually had a panic attack before in my life. And I was shaking so badly and profusely that I couldn't even read what I had written. And I didn't understand what was happening. And my therapist pulled me aside afterwards, and she said, I would love for you to rewrite this, because there's something that's happening in your body that is hidden from you. And are you ambidextrous? Can you write with both hands? And I said, I'm not. And she said, why don't we start trying to write it with your left hand to open up a different part of our brain that is hidden and blocked off from you, and don't use any of your fancy words. And so I remember laying on the floor at rehab. I can feel the textures of the carpet. I know that the therapy dog was next to me, and I got about a half a sentence in before I was like immediately pulled back into my first repressed memory of being 3 years old and pleasuring my father in the shower with him. And I like stood up and I just started sobbing, and I was pacing the halls. I threw up in the bathroom. I was so overcome with this full body resonance of this trauma. And for the first time in my whole life, I was 3 again. I had never really been present in my age. I didn't know what it was to be embodied at that point. And for me, embodiment, like I said, is such a prevalent part of healing from trauma. It's that coming home to your skin. It's that acknowledgement and that belief and that surrender. And from there, it kind of just became like the dust that flows in the desert. It just collects everything with it. And it took a long time and a lot more safety. I was immensely privileged to have a therapist outside of rehab once I finally left, who walked me through it. And she had like 3 PhDs in childhood trauma. She understood the level of complexity that I was navigating. And it was 3-4 days a week of therapy for, I would say, like 3 years to really start unpacking those memories. And when I was 20 years old, I ended up reporting for the sake of my younger cousins who I knew were being abused as well. That didn't go anywhere because my voice was not recognized. And then because of the privilege that I grew up in, and because my abuse was very entangled with law and the government, it didn't go anywhere. And so that's also been a journey of like reclaiming my full name, Skyler Mechelle Weinberg, and using that. I'm still contacted by my family. It is terrifying and very scary. And it's been this place. I mean, one of the most important parts of that journey with my therapist outside of rehab was understanding that surrender aspect to the memories. So they would start kind of like, I would say, like a corner in your head, like where you are looking at the ceiling and you see a tiny little piece of it, and it's very fuzzy, but it's like this looming thing in the back of your mind. And then it would start to just grow and grow and grow. And I would be so rigid. I mean, what do we do as human beings when we're in any type of emotional or physical pain? We tense up. And so she developed this path with me, knowing that I couldn't rely on any other methodology. I couldn't rely on dogmas. I couldn't rely on anything external except myself. Because if I did, then if I didn't have that thing with me, I would not feel safe ever. And so how do we start developing inward safety when we've never known the definition of safety itself? And so we start with surrender. We start with coming home to ourselves. And so we would do this thing where I would sit in a chair and I would slowly unclench my fists. And it took months to even like do one finger. And then I got to the point where I could absolutely sit in the chair, full surrender, palms up, and talk and hear and listen to myself. And that's how I started, and to this day, navigate memories. I have a lot less of memories that come back at this point. I am someone who advocates of not going back and saying, I need to know the entire longevity of my abuse in order to be free. I allow my body to lead me to those moments, because when I need to know, I walk through, yes, still a place of having to be comfortable with the surrender aspect, but I do eventually have the privilege to sit back, surrender, open my palms, and allow that memory to unfurl. And doing that has allowed me to not be chained to it. So when I have that memory, I walk through it, and then I release that fixed point that we talked about in the beginning, and then I just heal and start holding and believing that little girl who endured it. And I bring her home. And so I developed this kind of pattern of going, how can I start meeting them? And so on my healing journey, I ended up like drawing out all of the pictures of myself 1 through 18, because I didn't have any baby photos and I didn't know necessarily who I was. And so I said, how can I meet them? How do I bring them home? And so I drew and sketched them out. And then every time I would have a memory, whether it be abuse or not, I would try and learn more about her. And so when I would be triggered by a certain aspect, I started to develop an understanding, oh, that was when I was 6, or that was when I was 8. And this was who my 6-year-old was. And this is who my 8-year-old was. And how can I hold her? And my 6-year-old loves animals. And so if I was really heavy in a memory of my 6-year-old being abused, I would spend more time around animals. If I was really heavy in a time of my 8-year-old, I would spend more time like being creative with my design, because she loved to be quirky and colorful. And so there were these aspects that I started to develop. Instead of just the darkness, it was inviting in that wholeness. And despite that wholeness being fragmented, I kind of thought of it as like stained glass a little bit, and like, how can we bring her home? You know, how can we bring her into wholeness and not diminish that aspect of her that was a fighter who endured all of these things, and then also the gentility and the tenderness. And that has been something that I've been grateful for ever since, just because I wouldn't have had that understanding without Libby, who is that therapist. So
before we get into how you're using this, how you've taken this opportunity to help others, talk to me about, because I see a lot of your posting about you dance, you film yourself dancing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So as I had mentioned, I was my family was very intelligent in making sure that I had a very well-known persona of being a straight A student and having these extracurricular activities, and dance was a big part of that. I was a ballerina for 14 years, and that was something that was stripped from me when I got sick. It took a long time to be able to come home to my body and dancing. My body is, with chronic childhood abuse, your body starts to speed up the aging process, because it believes, it goes into this long form of survival where it believes that you don't have as long of a life as you should. And so it says, how can we give you as much life in the short amount of time? And so my body's a lot older than my age. And so it's been difficult to navigate that movement when I have an older body, but at the same time has been so vital in that homecoming. And so bringing movement back into my healing has been vital. And it has seasons where I go in waves where I'm dancing every day, and then sometimes I haven't danced in a while. But movement was also a really huge part of like reclaiming my skin, reclaiming that not all touch is bad touch, reclaiming that I don't have to be a source of pleasure for everybody. I can be my own source of pleasure for myself. And that doesn't necessarily mean sexual pleasure. It's any form of pleasure. It's that peace and that happiness and that joy. And what do those emotions feel like? Because the origin of all of my understanding of emotion was built from abuse. How do we start giving that new ground? How we plot new soil in that garden of our soul and give ourselves a new definition for these things. And they're constantly fluid and flux, and they morph, but dancing has been a way for me to express them when I don't have words, and when I'm scared, or when I feel rigid, or when I don't have the strength to open up those palms and really surrender to the work. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Before we go further, I want to read a few things that some people have written. Annette said, "Oh my goodness, Skyler, I thought I had dealt with my own memories, but I've never done this or heard her. You are helping me so much. Thank you." We have Christopher, who, again, he's does our graphics and our website. He said, "Skyler, you are a stunning embodiment of compassion, empowerment, and mindfulness. You inspire me to be more attentive to my internal experience, remembering I can give myself the safety, advocacy, and conditionality that each wound needs to transmute. Much love and respect, dear one. I am grateful you are here." You know, this is why I wanted your voice heard. There is Mechelle said, "Feeling so much compassion from you guys." What's so beautiful is that, and it's even in your words, the way you describe it, there is a way we can describe a situation that is a very, and I'm going to talk from a spiritual or a vibration aspect, that is a lower vibration where the hurt, it's like the seed of the hurt, and we can speak from that point. But the way that you talk about it, the verbiage that you use, it like skips over that. And I know that you said you've always been very eloquent with your words, but to me, it sounds very like it's from your heart. It's from your soul. It's like your child speaking from within, saying, "Yeah, I'm here, and I'm okay."
Yeah, it's that child is so vital. It's what gives me life. It's when I feel old. It's when I'm on my knees. I've had seasons where I've thrown up profusely from the pain and just been overcome and had so many moments of being done, you know, and that's valid. It's real. And again, it's that image that I have in my mind of just kneeling beside that part of me that is done and believing them and not doubting them is so important, because it's like breath. You know, when you're believed and when you are not doubted, despite the intensity of the emotion in the moment, or the intensity or the confusion that you're navigating, you don't have the words for it, to just be believed is like, oh, okay. And then it gives you that autonomy back to have choice again. When we have lack of breath, we have that life or death response to living, you know, and it's that pause that gives us that strength again. And then to be trusted in that decision is an internal process, and we get to navigate that on our journey. But it definitely is tender and it's a gift, you know?
So talk to me about what you're doing now. You said that there's been a shift on what you're doing, which I think is so beautiful. So talk to me, share with us what you're doing now and how you're advocating for others.
So I started advocacy work about 7 years ago, and that was a huge part of my own healing process. I think as a survivor of any sort of life abuse, we have this internal drive to advocate for other people. And being a trauma survivor, I wanted to step into those roles, especially with the lack of justice. And then more so because I have privilege. You know, a lot of people question that when I talk about it, and they go, "How? You've endured 18 years of agony. How do you have privilege?" And I step back and I go, despite the lack of judgment, despite all of these obstacles and the obstacles that I still have to face, I'm believed and I'm heard, and I have resources, and I've been able to leave, you know, like that is huge. And look at the life, like I have life in me. And so I wanted to kind of learn as much as I could from the process. So I stayed behind the scenes a lot in the nonprofit work that I did in the beginning stages. Just because I wanted to understand how things work. It's a part of how my brain is too. I think being a survivor, it gives us a little bit more of control when we kind of have a blueprint of life. And so, learning about that, learning about the board, learning about establishing organizations and how many obstacles and hoops you have to jump through, and how the origin point of maybe your advocacy work is halted by a lot of the policies and structures in nonprofit world. And so I understood that. I still was heavily involved with it. And then I started to work into like a more spiritual aspect of healing, where I do a lot of one-on-one work with survivors. I created courses. I try to do free work, things of that nature, to support the people who didn't have the resources that I had. And over the years, that has slowly developed. About 2 years ago, I would say, into this aspect of, for me and my life and my healing, I want to, instead of stand next to that survivor and believe them, even though that is my joy and my privilege, I want to be a bridge to a resource and work with those resources who are so passionate about what they're doing, and help them develop strategy to actually give authentic long-term support for survivors. And so currently I am I've created workshops for government officials, corrections facilities, organizations. I have a really beautiful meeting with a professor tomorrow who works with sex trafficking. I want to be able to establish nurses. I've been working with like forensic nurses and holistic service providers, just to give them an aspect of, here is all of the incredible work that you've already sourced. Here are all of the strategies and policies that you work with. And here's an aspect that isn't from a book. It's a story from a survivor with 18 years of abuse who has had the privilege to answer these questions that you can't really ask anybody else in your field. And how can I utilize this privilege that I've developed in my healing to sit across from these people who have the resources, have the professionalism, have the degrees to sit next to survivors and help them cultivate life? How can I answer these questions that aren't being answered anywhere else? And so I want to be able to provide that, invite conversation with these people in different languages. And so it took a long time to kind of say, okay, well, if I'm going to sit down next to a police officer, I have to have my mental awareness too, because it's very traumatizing for me. But it's a different conversation than I would sit next to a nurse with, because nurses go into this field and they're empathic already by nature, and they have this compassion and drive, and not that that doesn't exist in an officer, but there's a different level.
Skyler? Skyler? Oh.
Is it back?
Yeah, it's back now. Go ahead.
Sorry. How can we establish and invite honesty? Similarly to what we talked about in the beginning, I want to develop conversation and safety around these things, because there's such a lack of education in our society about trauma. And how can I help establish safety in order to provide conversation and provide answer? And so I'm actually going back to school for the first time, which is really exciting, because I did leave school in high school, and that's a journey in of itself. But I'm really excited to partner my work with an education so that I can step into more doors. And working with these pioneers in the field is my gift. It's just an honor to have my voice be recognized in these ways. And so I've been doing a lot of that, and hoping to establish, eventually turning these workshops into courses for universities, so they can go out and teach the future builders of our society in order to give them a more trauma-informed approach to their work.
Wow. I'm at a loss for words about what you're doing. That, and I love that you said it's my gift.
It is.
And it is love wins. Yeah. That's all I got to say. Love won.
Yeah.
With you. And I have friends that have there's a few watching that have gone through some aspects of your journey as well, and I've seen what it's done to them, and I've seen you're right, what it's done to their bodies and what it's done to them as people, and I've also seen them rise from that and transform their lives. And I know you are an absolute inspiration on so many different levels, that regardless of what people are going through, you can turn it into a gift. You can turn it into your platform for change and for beauty and for love.
Thank you.
So how can we support you? Your website, if you would, I would love to hear if you could let everybody know what your website is, how we can support you, as well as how can people reach out to you and to utilize your services?
Yeah, so my website is www.skyler-mechelle, MECHELLE.com. And there there's everything that you need to know about me and access to the workshops that I was just talking about. So I'm currently establishing a lot of networking going on within the universities and the hospitals around the Pacific Northwest and in British Columbia to set up kind of pro bono workshops in order for sponsorship for my schooling, because it's a hefty load on my mental and physical and emotional health. And so I kind of want to kind of establish a partnership with the communities that I'm going to be working with. And I always try and take a really huge consideration in the fact that I never want to take from the survivors that I'm trying to support. And that has been a huge overarching theme in my work, especially because being a trafficking survivor as well, money is very scary for me. And I had to do a lot of work in that aspect. So doing that type of work, how you can support me, it's going to launch soon. I started a podcast with my partner, and we're going to be talking about healing in partnership, as well as just what it looks like to live life after trauma from multiple levels. So you guys can listen to that as well. And I'll have links on my website, but on my page. And then I'm on Instagram a lot. I have a Patreon that has my blogs. I'm writing articles all the time. And if you ever want to reach out, my email is accessible through Instagram, Facebook, and my website. So if you need resources, if you're looking for holistic care, if you're looking for therapy, anything like that, I have a huge resource list. I have free courses for survivors. I don't do one-on-one work with survivors anymore, but I do have a lot of connections across the globe that I'm privileged to extend to to survivors for their healing and anything like that. And then within the podcast, we answer questions for survivors, and then on my Instagram and Facebook, which is kind of how I still keep that connection in a new way.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, is that's how I reached out to Skyler, was on Instagram.
Yeah.
I messaged her. She answered very promptly. So I would highly recommend, I mean, if the people that have been watching, and this will go on our YouTube channel, and anybody who's watching this, whether it's live or whether it's recorded, please, if you know of somebody that needs assistance, this is a beautiful resource to create change. When one heals, we all heal, and everybody deserves healing.
Yeah.
Regardless of what it is,
Yeah.
Everyone deserves it. It's our birthright.
Yeah.
I am honored. I'm absolutely honored to be in your presence. I certainly hope at some time I can meet you in person and just sit with you and just learn from you. Mm-hmm. I love the way you articulate. There's healing in your words. There is healing in your movements. There is healing in everything about you. And I am so grateful that you're here, and that the child in you at every different age was strong enough to be here today. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been such a gift I say that a lot, but I talk about it, how there's not a day that goes by, even on the most hard days, that I don't have that gratitude in me. And this is a big part of that. So thank you. It's been my privilege.
Wow. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I wanted to mention that tomorrow we will have Bliss, and she will be teaching Accelerating Consciousness Through Initiation. We will also have Mohammed, who is out of Egypt. He teaches via Skype and Zoom here in the States, and he's going to be talking about ascension. He talks about Egyptology is what he teaches on. So he's going to be coming forward, and he has a lot of different topics that he's going to be talking about on Wednesdays. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the support, for watching this with Skyler. And Skyler, love you to the moon and back 1,000,000 times. Thank you.
Love you too. Have a beautiful day.
You too. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.